On behalf of the Community and Public Relations Committee of the Pennsylvania Bar Association, welcome to our honored guests, families, and grandparents, and interested members of the public. Probably many of you are or will be involved in the implementation of the new law that is the subject of today's event. We gather in recognition of a much-needed change in the law that has actually been accomplished. Numbers vary, but it is estimated that approximately 90,000 grandparents are raising grandchildren in large part due to the opioid epidemic. This new law will support the efforts of these grandparents and loving caregivers. I am Grace Schuyler, co-chair of the Community and Public Relations Committee. My co-chair, Lars Anderson, had a last-minute schedule conflict and sends his regrets for not being able to be here with us today. The project selected by the committee for this year was the preparation and publication of a pamphlet that will be distributed throughout the state, advising people of this important new law that has been passed. Details about the law and the efforts that are underway in Pennsylvania to provide assistance to families and grandparents will be provided by today's speakers. It is appropriate that our first speaker is Charles Eppolito, a partner with the White & Williams law firm in Philadelphia. He has served in many years in numerous leadership positions within the Pennsylvania Bar Association before ascending to the presidency, and he currently serves in that position as the president of the Pennsylvania Bar Association. He comes to that position with considerable experience and with considerable respect from the attorney members throughout the state. Charles?
Thank you, Grace. Good morning. As a result of the opioid epidemic sweeping across Pennsylvania, more and more grandparents, other relatives, and neighbors find themselves being primary caregivers for minor children without parents present. Recent statistics from grandfamilies.org show that 103,000 Pennsylvania children live with a relative without a parent present, and more than 88,000 grandparents are serving as heads of households responsible for minor children that live with them. Act 21 of 2018, which went into effect on July 3rd, 2018, expands custody rights for caregivers who find themselves in these challenging situations. Today, the Pennsylvania Bar Association is kicking off its Understanding When Grandparents and Others Can Seek Custody public information campaign. This campaign is designed to help Pennsylvanians better understand this change in the law, to help more grandparents and caring individuals establish the right to pursue custody in the court system. This informational campaign has received grant assistance from the Pennsylvania Bar Insurance and Trust Fund, which, along with the Pennsylvania Bar Association, is providing financial support to promote the campaign and to fund the production of educational materials. I'd like to thank the Pennsylvania Bar Association Community and Public Relations Campaign for organizing this outreach effort. I'd also like to thank members of the Pennsylvania Bar's Family Law section for their assistance in assembling information and the educational materials associated with the campaign. Now, in a few minutes, we will hear from several speakers. We will hear from Senator Donald White, who is the primary sponsor of this new legislation. We also expect to hear from Representative Eddie Day Pashinsky, a sponsor of a pending bill aimed at further assisting grandparents and those similarly situated. Pennsylvania Bar Association Family Law Section members, Christina DiMatteo and Lawrence Persick, you'll hear from them as well. And Wendy Lorenzo, she's the Director of Meetings at Pennsylvania Bar Association, but also importantly, Wendy is the founder of the Elizabeth Lorenzo Eye Care Foundation. I also want to acknowledge several very important campaign partners. First, 27 county bar associations from throughout Pennsylvania are assisting with this campaign, and they're helping us get the word out. Thanks to them. And special thanks to the Elizabeth Lorenzo Eye Care Foundation for their support today and for their dedication to providing a voice to those battling addiction. Near me, by the podium, is a large-scale version of a campaign ad that is currently running and will continue to run in Pennsylvania newspapers, thanks to some other partnerships. In partnership with the Pennsylvania News Media Association, we are running this campaign ad in more than 80 daily and weekly newspapers throughout Pennsylvania. We expect that this ad and this important message will reach over 4 million Pennsylvanians. In addition, in partnership with the Pennsylvania Association of Broadcasters, we are airing 30-second spots for both television and radio throughout the state over the next 2 weeks to reach even more Pennsylvania residents with this important message. Now, a brochure like this one is about the Understanding When Grandparents and Others Can Seek Custody campaign. It explains the changes and the new law and how we can take advantage of that to help those who truly need it. This can be accessed and downloaded on the Pennsylvania Bar Association's website, which is www.pabar.org. These brochures can also be mailed free of charge to anyone requesting one. In addition, other information, support, and addiction resources are available on the PBA's website. The Pennsylvania Bar Association is pleased to support these efforts in helping Pennsylvanians understand the expansion of legal standing so that grandparents can make the right decisions to help their grandchildren. Again, thanks to all Pennsylvania Bar Association members, to the County Bar Association members, and to the many others who are partners and who are supporting this critically important public information campaign. Next, I'll turn it over to Grace Schuyler, who will introduce our next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles, for those comments. Our next speaker is Senator Don White. He has been in the Senate since 2000, serving the counties of Armstrong, Indiana, and parts of Butler and Westmoreland counties. Senator White has an illustrious career, sponsoring many important bills that are part of the law in Pennsylvania today. Time does not permit me to list his many accomplishments and those bills that he has presented. Suffice to say, in the last legislative session, over 200 bills were either sponsored or co-sponsored by him. He was the prime sponsor of Senate Bill 844, and he is the best person to explain the history and the compelling need to get this bill introduced and passed. Senator Don White from the 41st Senatorial District.
Good morning. And I also want to put a plug in for the Pennsylvania Bar Association. This attempt to get the understanding of my Senate bill is very important. And there are a lot of cases out there that I'm sure I'll continue to meet as this goes along regarding its impact. The issue of protecting and preserving the rights of grandparents is definitely one that I can understand and appreciate, especially after hearing the story of Mr. and Mrs. Ferens, who you'll hear from shortly, battle for care for their grandchildren. I knew right then and there that we as a Commonwealth needed to act. This case dramatically showed that we needed to bring sanity and common sense back into play when it comes to determining who should be entrusted with custody in those cases where no biological or adoptive parent can care for the child. This was not always the case in Pennsylvania. Unfortunately, when the legislature amended the custody and visitation statute in 2010, a grandparent's right or standing to file for custody of a grandchild became much more limited. Standing, in a legal sense, is a preliminary step that determines only which parties can be in the courtroom pursuing custody. In custody trial, the court considers the best interest of the children and takes into account the children's relationship with all of the parties. Since 2010, the change in the statute removed what was once an automatic right, and that is exactly what the Farrens faced after their grandchildren's biological mother died in 2012. Their grandchildren continue living with their father, with some assistance from extended family, until the father's death in 2015. At that point, no one other than the parents had ever had formal custody of the children. Upon the father's death, the Farrens, rightfully so, filed an emergency petition for custody. In doing so, it was determined that they did not have the standing to pursue custody because they did not meet the criteria under state law as revised in 2010. There is an old age adage that blood is thicker than water. But that simple truism wasn't codified in the volumes and volumes of family law, and the Farrens were treated as outsiders by the court. That's just not right for the grandparents or especially the children. That's why I introduced Senate Bill 844, which was only signed into law as Act 21. Under Act 21, third parties, including grandparents, now have legal standing to file for legal custody in cases where the parents are deceased or absent, provided they can show that they have a sustained, substantial, and sincere interest in the welfare of the child. The law also includes a provision that allows grandparents and great-grandparents to file for partial physical custody or supervised physical custody in cases where the parents of the child have commenced a proceeding for custody and do not agree with the grandparent should have custody. Confusing, I know. While the Farren story was one that started this process, there could have been any number of similar cases out there, and since this was passed in the early part of July, I've heard from several of them. Unfortunately, the need for Act 21 is underlined by the devastating toll of the opioid abuse crisis on families across this Commonwealth. Too many lives have been tragically cut short by the opioid epidemic, and children end up becoming caught up in the turmoil that causes. Act 21 gives legal standing to people, grandparents in particular, who are sincerely concerned for these children. In closing, I want to note and thank you, everyone who helped make this law a reality. Senate Bill 844 received unanimous support in both the Senate and the House of Representatives and was strongly endorsed by organizations including the Center for Child Advocates, Pennsylvania Legal Services, and most certainly the Pennsylvania Bar Association. Thank you for supporting Pennsylvania's grandparents and protecting their rights. And to dramatize this, and it came all the way down from my hometown of Indiana, PA, I want to introduce the two people that got me on the path of Senate Bill 844. Their story is tragic. Their story is still not complete. Custody to this day is still in the hands of the girlfriend of the deceased father. And if it weren't for them and their passion for trying to get some understanding and ability to have a standing in court, they've been relentless, and I'm very, very proud of them. I'll introduce to you now Bobby and Calvin Farrell. Thank you.
Good morning. First, today, we would like to thank the Pennsylvania Bar Association for putting this press conference together and for inviting us to speak on behalf of our own situation, as well as all grandparents in the state of Pennsylvania who will benefit from this important legislation. We wish to thank many people who worked diligently to get this legislation passed into law. A special thanks to Senator Don White, who spoke from the heart, and everything he said is true. His genuine and sincere concern is what brought our plight to Harrisburg. We really do not fully know who every single person would be that worked behind the scenes to get this legislation into law, but we are greatly appreciative for all of you and for all of your efforts. Our story began in 2012 when our daughter, the youngest of our 3 children, passed away sudden and unexpected at the age of 34. She was married, 2 young children, a daughter age 7 and a son 7 months old. In 2015, her husband, the children's biological father, passed away unexpectedly, leaving 2 young children, neither parent living, to care for them. So as maternal grandparents, Cal and I began pursuing primary physical and sole legal custody of the children. The journey was difficult under the old statute. We were unable to establish standing, therefore we were unable to get custody of our grandchildren. Act 21 has allowed us to pursue our complaint for custody. We're currently in the legal system with our custody case, and it's been nearly 3 years in the process, but Act 21 clearly has made a difference in our case, as now we have a right to be heard. We look forward to a resolution that will allow us to raise our daughter's 2 beautiful children. And may God bless the work of our legislatures that is so meaningful to families in Pennsylvania and to grandparents in particular as we strive to hold our families together. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator White and Mr. and Mrs. Farron. The Pennsylvania Bar Association has numerous committees and sections, and one of the most dynamic is the Family Law section. We reached out to them for assistance in developing the Pennsylvania Bar Association pamphlet. We acknowledge at this time with much gratitude the efforts and professional expertise of Skip Persick and Christina DiMatteo for their assistance in drafting Senate Bill 844 and for preparing the public information pamphlet. This pamphlet will be distributed to countless individuals and organizations throughout the state. Skip Persick is a partner in the Lamb McErlane Law Firm in Chester County. Christine DiMatteo is the founding partner of the DiMatteo Law Firm in Montgomery County.
Good morning. We've heard a lot of talk this morning about grandparents, and certainly this legislation is a step forward for grandparents. But when you handle child custody cases, the object of the legal proceeding is to find out what is the best interest of the child. So what this legislation hopes to do is to get that process more correctly on track and try to find what is best for a child. And we as family law practitioners know that sometimes as the saying goes, it takes a village to raise a child. The act is titled about grandparents. However, I'm here to tell you that it doesn't just cover grandparents. It covers other third parties as well. It would cover aunts, uncles, godparents, step-parents, neighbors, any person who has, as the legislation says, a person who has assumed or is willing to assume the responsibility of the care of a particular child, and that person can establish by clear and convincing evidence in a court that they have a sustained, substantial, and sincere interest in the welfare of the child. And additionally, the situation has to exist whereby the parent is no longer in the picture. The parent has no form of care or control of the child. That could be by death, incarceration, or just apathy. And we've talked about the opioid epidemic this morning, and that's certainly those parents have been removed from the situation for the proper care of their children, and someone else needs to step up. So as I said, Senator White's legislation has seen that need, and it's focusing on that particular need. One other point is that what we're talking about here is standing. The grandparents or the third parties would not automatically have the right to raise that child. They would have the right to go into court and say to the court why it is in the best interest of this particular child for that person to raise that child and have a role in that child's upbringing. Chris is here to talk a little bit more about how the legislation focuses on grandparents.
Sure. Thank you. So in addition to the provisions discussed by my colleague Skip Persick, Act 21 also speaks specifically to some grandparent issues. Act 21 helps to ensure that grandparents can maintain stable relationships with their grandchildren even when the children's parents are fighting over custody. In situations where grandparents might be prevented from seeing their grandchildren due to the conflict that arises between the parents who might be in the midst of a custody battle, the new law gives grandparents direct access to the courts to seek ongoing contact with their grandchildren. Specifically, grandparents now have standing to seek partial or supervised physical custody of their grandchildren in cases where the parents of the children commenced a proceeding for custody and where the parents do not agree as to whether the grandparents should have custody time with their children. This is really important in high conflict custody cases where sometimes one parent might try to impair the children's relationship with family members of the other party simply out of anger or spite. By passing this law, we've now ensured that grandparents have standing to seek direct relief from the courts, and this helps to ensure stability in family relationships for children across the Commonwealth.
Thank you.
Again, thank you, Skip and Christina, for your expertise. Another honored guest with us today is Representative Eddie Day Pshinski. He has represented the 121st Legislative District in Luzerne County since 2006. In addition, he continues to serve in numerous community leadership positions and has initiated projects and task forces to enhance healthcare reform, disaster recovery efforts, and for strengthening public education. Representative Pshinski is the sponsor of another important bill, House Bill 1539. I present the Honorable Eddie Day Pshinski to tell you about his efforts in supporting grandparents and to provide stability to children impacted by the opioid epidemic.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Grace. Thank you, one and all, for being here today. I'd like to thank the good work of Senator White, a wonderful job that he's done. And of course, nothing gets done without your help. You're going to play a major role today and every day until we're able to make the changes in the laws necessary to allow you to have access to your grandchildren, to make sure that they remove from the trauma that they've experienced, and to have a chance for success. My bill, House Bill 1539, provides temporary emergency guardianship when that emergency occurs when the parent or parents have succumbed to addiction, either through alcoholism or opioids. The purpose for this bill and the reason why it's so important is because many times in an emergency situation, grandparents have been thrown in this position with no rights, no loco parentis. So my bill provides for this emergency temporary guardianship, which is not a threat to custody. And that custody between the parents and the grandparents often creates a volatile situation. My bill also allows for the parent of that child to sign off that guardianship to those grandparents with no hassle. I've worked with Chairlady Catherine Watson, who is the chairwoman of the Children and Youth Committee, and she has sponsored House Bill 2133. Both of these bills have been put into a package. Her bill provides for a kinship navigator. So when that person is thrown in that unenviable position of having to raise the children, where do they go? If her bill passes, now you make one contact to the kinship navigator. That navigator will then navigate the complexity of the system to help that grandparent raise that child. Every one of us are aware the tremendous disparity between different situations. We could have some grandparents that are in their 80s taking care of an infant or a teenager. Or we could have grandparents in their 40s and 50s working, taking care of an infant or a teenager. There are many things that are still needed: respite, daycare, safe visitation areas, and countless others. I plead to you, I ask you to continue on with your charge, to make your calls to your senators all over this state, because House Bill 1539, the temporary emergency guardianship, House Bill 2133, kinship navigator, is on third consideration in the Senate, which means all they have to do is bring it to the floor, vote on it, the governor will sign it, it becomes law. Now you will have two other bills to help you navigate the system. We've worked very hard on this. We now need your help to make those phone calls. Can you do it? I need some energy here. Can you do it? Are you going to call those senators? How many times? 10. How many times it takes to get it passed? You called it. That's it. That's it. That's what we want. Thank you so very much. God bless all of you. Thank you, Grace. Thank you for the PA Bar Association and Family Law. Thank you. Thank you so much, Grace.
Thank you, Representative Pashinsky. Within the Pennsylvania Bar Association family, there is an employee who has personally experienced what we have been discussing today. She is Wendy Lorenzo, the meeting director for the Pennsylvania Bar Association. Wendy, will you please share your story and the actions that have resulted from that?
Thank you, Grace. Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to address you briefly this morning. As you've heard, I am an employee of the Pennsylvania Bar Association, and on March 19th of 2017, I lost my 25-year-old daughter, Elizabeth, to a heroin overdose. At the time of Liz's death, she left behind my 9-month-old grandson. Carson is now 2 years old. Carson's father and my daughter were both 2 years clean, but relapsed together and bought heroin laced with fentanyl. My daughter was overprescribed prescription medications, which stopped her heart immediately. I consider myself one of the lucky ones. Carson lives with now and is being raised by his father, Kyle, who is now 18 months in recovery. Since the time my daughter passed away, thank you. Yeah, let's clap for that. Since the time my daughter passed away, I started the Elizabeth Lorenzo Eye Care Foundation to assist those battling addiction and their families to get help. I have met many other parents who have lost children, not only to drug overdose deaths, but to the drug heroin itself, to children in and out of rehab, to those incarcerated or other death-related circumstances. We as grandparents have had to take on the role of parent, and I see personally the toll that this has taken on my friends, mentally, physically, and financially. My great friend Joanne Clow from Camp Hill became the primary caregiver of her 2-year-old granddaughter Carter after Joanne's daughter Emily passed away in December 2016. My friends Sandy and Dennis Sipe became the primary caregivers of their 5-year-old grandson Austin after their son Jamie was killed in a fatal car accident in January of 2016. My friend Vicki Gladfelder from York, who founded the Not One More York chapter, is raising her autistic grandson Kaylin after the death of her son Bob in April of 2014. My friend Jane Grickus from Pottstown, when her daughter Jessica passed away in March of this year. Jane is now raising her 8-year-old granddaughter Brianna. Jane could not be here today due to work, as with many other grandparents, but she sent me this message, and I promised her I would share it. I would be there today in a heartbeat if I didn't have to work. It really saddens me because this is an issue that has not been given the attention it needs. I was very fortunate because my granddaughter already lived with me and there was not a huge lifestyle adjustment, just the pain and grief after Jess died. But there are many others who are not as fortunate. The children living in an unhealthy environment with little to no rules. The parents of parents who are incarcerated or have died, and both the children and grandparents are grieving their loss as well as trying to learn to live together. And then there is the financial side. Not everyone can afford to raise another child, although there really isn't a choice. And lastly, the health aspect when some grandparents have real issues when making the situation even harder with physical limitations. Those are just a few of the grandparents raising their grandchildren, and my list goes on and on. I would like to thank the folks who are here today, standing with me, who have been impacted by the opioid epidemic. These children are so precious to their grandparents, and these grandparents so courageously and selflessly step up each and every day to fulfill the needs of their grandchildren, oftentimes at the expense of their own well-being and health. I, along with all the other grandparents here today, would like to thank Senator Don White for developing the legislation expanding custody rights for grandparents that is now law in Pennsylvania. Thank you also. Thank you also to Representatives Kathy Watson and Eddie Day Pashinsky for their sponsored legislation of House Bill 1539, Temporary Guardianship for Grandparents Raising Grandchildren, and House Bill 2133, a statewide kinship navigator program to help grandparents find the resources they need. Thank you all for attending and giving me this opportunity.
Thank you, Wendy, for sharing that personal experience and all that you and those working with you have accomplished. We have a few minutes for media questions and answers. Are there any questions for our honored panel of guests? If not, I would like to thank all of you for your participation and support in making today a reality. I would also like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the tremendous efforts of two persons with the Pennsylvania Bar Association for all of their work behind the scenes. You know, there's someone or someones that are behind the scene that make everything seem effortless for the rest of us. Those two persons are Susanna Sabati and Jeff Gingrich. They have put in countless hours in keeping us all on the same page and bringing us here today. Thank you also to the news media and the press for helping us to get this valuable information out to the public. Thank you.